that America will become a land sharing the fruits of the land, not for the favored few, not to satisfy greed, but that all may live in a land in which the Lord has provided an abundance sufficient for the luxury and convenience of the people in general, I think.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm the ghost of Smedley Butler. I'm here with the ghost of Judge James Horton, and we're the Yellowhammers. How you doing, Judge?
I'm good, General. How are you?
Good. What are we talking about today?
First on the agenda, Ukraine.
Tell me about the Ukraine.
So, some news in the last week. The big news, I think about a week ago now, was the Biden administration authorized the use of American ordinance to strike inside of Russia for the first time. And then since then, we've had some nuclear saber rattling from Putin, like he did, before we gave long-range artillery, before we gave ATACMS, before we gave main battle tanks, before we gave F-16s, where he threatens to nuke Ukraine or Europe and then doesn't.
Well, I'm going to cut you off right there and ask the really important question. Why should the people of Alabama care about what happens in Ukraine?
Bunch of reasons. Do you want the economic one first, or do you want the geopolitical America's role in the world one first?
How does it help the average Alabamian at the dinner table? So
economically, right? You hear this talking point all the time where they say, "Oh, we're sending a blank check to Ukraine." Well, that's bullshit. And the people that say that, quite frankly, they know that it's bullshit. So every bullet, every artillery shell, every rocket that we send to Ukraine, they're made in America. They're manufactured in America. Or we're sending current U.S. Army stocks or U.S. military stocks to Ukraine, and then we replace them with things made in America.
I believe there's a Javelin plant in Troy.
In Troy,
yeah.
In Pike County. I think Biden actually visited it in 2022. And, those are a big part.
His old ass was walking around Troy
Walking around Troy, Alabama. Okay. And those Javelins are a big part of the arsenal, too, for those of you that aren't military nuts like the general here. They are shoulder-fired anti-tank weapons, and really did a number for the Ukrainians on the Russians early in the war.
Yeah, they had like small, strike teams of like 5 guys going out and just hitting these long Russian columns, and you hit the tank in the back first, and then you hit the tank in the front second, and then creates a kill zone of everybody in between. They actually had some really good video. This is probably the most video captured war of all time, between the drones and just, propaganda people filming everything they do. It's wild, the stuff you can find on the internet. But the Javelin is one of the best infantry weapons out there, and it has single-handedly punched Russia in the face.
Cost them a lot of armor, a lot of armored personnel carriers, tanks, that sort of thing.
And right now, Russia's kind of in a stalemate. They just keep throwing bodies at Ukraine, and they're slowly gaining ground just because Ukraine doesn't have that many people. And now the North Koreans are involved.
Which, I've said this for a while when you and I talk off air, that we're in a new Cold War. We're in a situation where, to borrow a term from W, we have a new axis of evil. We've got North Korea, we've got Russia, and we've got China, who are really going to be the big antagonists in this century coming forward. And I think you would probably add Iran to that group as well.
I would put Iran in there. They've been behaving very badly when it comes to Hezbollah, Hamas, and Israel in general. And Netanyahu's not been the best either. I just saw where their International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for both the leaders of Israel and Hamas. So equal opportunity arrest warrants there.
And I think that's probably accurate. But I want to turn back to this axis of evil thing and put a question to you. I sort of alluded to the fact earlier that I thought it was important that for America internationally and our international interests to stand up for Ukraine here and stand up to Russia. From your perspective, do you agree, disagree, or why?
I'm going to disagree because I don't think it's an American issue. I think it's a democracy issue. I think it's important for democracies to stand up against authoritarian governments like Russia, like China, like North Korea, to ensure peace and prosperity throughout the world. There's so many studies out there showing democracies do not go to war. They just don't. Authoritarian regimes, dictators, they love going to war because it's how they stay in stay in power. As far as America jumping in and as a democracy and defending Ukraine, it absolutely must. We are the arsenal of democracy. Always have been. We were there when Great Britain and France took it in the face to Germany in World War II. And we were there when Great Britain and France took it in the face in Germany in World War I. But we have been tooling up our defense industry for, 80 years now. And we've got all this massive military industrial complex. What's the point of getting all these arms and toys and technology if we don't actually use them to defend democracy?
Well, and people don't understand, I think, the goodwill that gets us throughout the world, the amount of influence that gives the Americans. When we talk about NATO, we are the arsenal of NATO. We're the largest military power on the planet. And quite frankly, all the countries for NATO fall in line with us. I think back to Afghanistan. When we think back to the 9/11 terrorist attacks, who went in there with us? Obviously lots of UN countries did, but also it was a NATO operation. There have been so many of these conflicts that we've been involved with in the last 30, 40 years that have been NATO operations. So we're not necessarily footing the bill alone. We've got international partners.
Well, I mean, to give the President-elect Trump credit, he was absolutely right that a lot of these NATO members have not been towing their own when it comes to military budgets and keeping the arms ready in case there is such a hot war that breaks out over there in Eastern Europe. Threatening to pull out of NATO may be a little much, but making those NATO countries that aren't putting under, I think, 2% towards the defense budget, buckle up and get that done is something we absolutely need. And if President Trump pulls out of NATO right now, I hope England, France, Germany, Spain, Italy, and every Western European country bands together to help out Ukraine.
Those countries are gearing up as it is, and I think they would agree if we had a Brit sitting with us, a Frenchman. I mean, certainly the Poles are way out in front of this. They've been rearming like crazy for a decade or more now. The Baltic states. But I think most of Europe at this point would agree that in fact they do have to rearm. As far as the threats to pull out of NATO, what that does is make the United States an unstable part.
Yeah.
And the thing about international relations is predictability. You need to be able to rely on your allies, know what they're going to do, be able to predict their actions. Because it's that sort of instability, that sort of anarchic system that we get in international relations that causes anxiety. And the United States has been a rock-solid partner since at least the end of the Second World War.
Well, what do you think about the whole madman theory between Nixon and Trump?
Break it down for me.
All right, the madman theory is that it's easier to negotiate with somebody who's unpredictable because you never know what they're going to do. And you need a madman, quote unquote, only Nixon could go to China because Nixon was a madman. Therefore, China didn't know what was going to happen. And when he did come with an overture of good tidings, they were willing to accept it, as opposed to the same old, same old. There is some credibility to the madman theory. I don't buy it as much. I think predictability is good, but I think you need to escalate certain conflicts when there's been a pattern of behavior shown. And Vladimir Putin has invaded 3 countries now.
Georgia, Moldova.
Ukraine
twice.
So if he's not stopped now, he won't ever stop.
And that's his stated goal. This is not a secret that what Vladimir Putin wants to do is rebuild the Soviet Union.
He wants to rebuild the Russian Empire.
Russia is an empire, and people don't realize that, but there are 21 individual republics inside of Russia. The vast majority of people in Russia are not ethnic Russians. And think back to the Chechen wars, and when they razed Grozny to the ground and killed the whole war in Chechnya. That was an effort to hold on to what was going to be a breakaway republic. Chechnya wanted independence. They wanted to govern themselves. They were tired of being under the boot of the Russians. And what did Putin do when they tried to pull away? Honestly, he committed a genocide.
And inserted his own strongman over there. I think it's Kadyrov.
Yeah. The TikTok soldiers.
Yes. Oh, yeah. For those of you listening, the the Chechen warriors in Ukraine have a tendency to post their stuff on TikTok, and mostly it's them firing machine guns into some trees.
Or ridiculous things like riding around in a cyber truck with a machine gun on the back. Just things that you're never going to see in combat. Sorry, Elon.
Yeah, the TikTok soldiers, I think, have mainly been relegated to being a quote-unquote blocking force. And in the old days of the Soviet Union forming, a blocking force was a group of soldiers you put behind your front line to shoot anybody that retreated.
And they're still doing that.
It's insane that you have a country this day of age
in 2024
using blocking troops to murder anybody that tries to turn around.
So you said it about Putin having his sights on Eastern Europe and reconstituting the Soviet Union. Does the phrase "don't die for Danzig" mean anything to you?
That was, I think it was France.
It was France.
Yeah. When Hitler said, "Give me, we want Danzig back," and Poland was like, "No," and France was guaranteeing the independence of Poland, especially Danzig.
Right. They say there's nothing new under the sun, and I think that's true. So if we look back to World War II, Hitler's reason for reoccupying the Rhineland, for annexing Austria, for taking parts of Poland, were that there are ethnic Germans there.
You forgot about the Sudetenland.
The Sudetenland. Czechoslovakia, even. They gave us the Munich Agreement. You could see it coming because he did it time and time again. There are ethnic Germans there, German speakers. They're being persecuted. What's the same thing that Putin says is his cause belli to go to Ukraine?
There's ethnic Russians in eastern Ukraine.
Ethnic Russians in Ukraine, and they're being persecuted.
There's also that theory that Russia doesn't feel safe unless it's, all the way in Vienna, because they don't have any natural land borders. Well, tough cookies. Like
who does?
No one's going to invade you. America's lucky. We got 2 oceans in Canada, and no one's in Canada.
Right.
So it's pretty much impossible to invade mainland America. But
there's a theory of international relations that, if I had the book in front of me, I'm going to tell you what it's called. But it essentially stands for the fact that the more, let's say I'm a country, right? I'm Ukraine, for example. And I build up my defenses because I'm worried about Russia, I'm worried about my neighbors. To them, that looks like a threat because they look across the border and what do they see? They see a large conventional military force. And so there is this idea in international relations that the stronger you become, the more insecurity that you create in other people. And I think that's sort of the argument for that the Russian apologists try to mold into justifying Russian actions in Ukraine. But at the end of the day, it's exactly what you said it was. It comes down to the fact that we have a sovereign country in Ukraine, and then we have a next-door neighbor, larger, more powerful, with imperialistic ambitions, with their sights set on that. And if we look at other places in the world, where else is that going to play out? The obvious answer is Taiwan and China. These other members of again, to borrow W's term, the axis of evil, these other totalitarian regimes that are watching what happens in Ukraine, if you don't think that's a test case, and if China sees us abandon Ukraine, they're going to say, oh, hell yeah, give me Taiwan.
I think, what are we, 2 years into Ukraine now?
Almost 3 full years.
Almost 3 full years.
February of 22. So February 25 will be 3 years.
The Russian economy is in the absolute shitter. Their inflation, I think I read is at 35%. Their interest rates for
last time I checked, we're at 21,
21,
which is ridiculous, okay. Right? We talk about the United States. You get a 6% mortgage these days, and I think a little under 6% is maybe the base rate that you get from the Federal Reserve. From the central bank in Russia, it's 21%, and their inflation is 8.5, where ours is below 3. And I saw today that in the last week, the ruble's gone from like 97 to 95 rubles per U.S. dollar to 105 in a week. And so their currency is still cratering, which raises a question. Does Ukraine have to hold on for absolute military victory there, or are they looking for conditions where Russia can't continue the fight?
I think they're looking for conditions where Russia can't continue to fight. And I think those conditions are right around the corner. Like, I'm giving it months. Today is 11/26/2024, and I'm calling less than 5 months, Russia's conditions are going to be so catastrophic they won't be able to continue the war.
In general, you alluded to this earlier. To this point, the number of casualties that the Russians are sustaining in Ukraine are unlike anything that we've seen since the Second World War. The famous Russian war that we all study in the West is Afghanistan. We've all seen Charlie Wilson's war, where we supply the Mujahideen with stingers and help them fight the Russians. Well, that thing went on for, I think, 11 years or so. From they invaded in 78, 79, continued to the late 80s. I think they maybe pulled out in 89. So the whole time that's going on, the Russians lose approximately 50,000 casualties in Afghanistan. Here we are, 3 years into the war, compared to that one being 10 or so. We're almost 3 full years into the war in Ukraine, and they're looking at 700,000 plus killed and wounded in Ukraine. And what that's done is the reason that their economy is creaking. Not only do they have to replace all these tanks, planes, drones, rocket launchers, artillery pieces that have been destroyed there, and they're looking to North Korea to do a lot of it now, but they are also having to print money to get new troops. You can't. They did, I think, a couple of years ago, a couple of rounds of conscription, and that caused such issues socially in Russia that they don't feel that they can do that again. That's why Putin is offering these huge bonuses for people to sign up and come and die in Ukraine.
Well, they recruited everywhere but Moscow and St. Petersburg.
Right, because that's the political base.
Yes, those are your elites. Those are your quote unquote middle class, if there's such a thing exists in Russia. Those people didn't get conscripted. It was all the poor backwoods people and the minorities around Russia got conscripted to go and just get absolutely annihilated the front lines of Ukraine. And the problem you have with having over 700,000 dead men is that that's a lot of productivity in your economy that just vanishes.
That you need to rebuild these tanks, planes, artillery pieces.
No, not just that, but to keep the lights on.
Yeah.
To pave the roads, to make the trains run. And due to Western sanctions, Russia's not getting any new airplane parts. They're not getting any new train brakes. So you're having a lot of rail cars suddenly explode and fall off the rail lines. So you're seeing the basic infrastructure of Russia crumble apart. And there's no one to fix it. Speaking of that, all their oil infrastructure was created by Exxon. And all the people that know how to fix it are in America, and they're not allowed to go over there and fix it.
Which you probably wouldn't want to anyway, to end up in a gulag, right?
Not if you make them money.
That's true.
So the entire oil pipeline is falling apart in Russia. So I don't know how much longer they can sustain this. With the interest rates the way they are, inflation the way it is, and just the breakdown of everyday services for the average Russian, I don't know. I really don't know how much longer Vladimir Putin can make this last.
And it's not just you saying that. I've seen lots of international relations experts, economists who agree with you and think that Russia is essentially going to crack in 2025 because they can't keep this up. And that's what Ronald Reagan did in March.
How do you define it, cracking?
Either one of several things. The breakdown of civil society, which I think, as far as people in Russia proper getting out and protest, that's really not their culture. There is the more likely outcome that one of the people around Putin take care of him for us. Because I think Putin sees this is there's essentially, do you think there's a way out for him?
No.
So
he's in too deep.
I agree with that. There's no way that he can, quote unquote, lose in Ukraine and stay in power. The oligarchs, the kleptocrats, they're not going to let that happen. So the way it ends is either a civil uprising, which we almost saw with Prigozhin and Wagner, a year and a half ago now?
Yeah, the ride to Moscow.
Right. And, looking back, doesn't he wish he had finished that one?
He was so close, man.
So close. So that would be an option, some sort of popular uprising. But I think more likely an ouster from somebody close to him. Because at some point, you're looking at stagflation, you're looking at economic collapse, you're looking at starvation, and even Russia can't sustain that.
Anybody close to him that's even mentioned doing anything like that's been thrown out of a 5-story window.
Even most recently, a week or two ago, you had that ballerina who had been critical of the war effort in Ukraine, who was defenestrated from a window, who mysteriously fell.
He took a swan dive.
Took a swan dive. So, I'm sure the authorities would be like, "Oh, he was drunk," but come on, just a coincidence.
The Ukrainian people have suffered
horrendously.
Just, if you look back over their history, it's, and then it got worse, and then it got worse, especially with Ukraine. I can't remember. It was the famine induced by Stalin.
Holodomor or whatever.
Holodomor, that was that was a bad one. No, was it Lenin? I think it was Lenin.
It was Stalin.
Was it Stalin? Okay. It was one of those. Oh, I was watching Russian propaganda, and they want to attack America so bad they're going to create the Straits of Stalin, which is going to be, they're going to turn the Mississippi and like crater it out and divide America because the bombs are going to be so big. And I was like,
good God.
How do you, okay, good luck.
Well,
you're fighting a smaller, minor neighbor, and they've kicked your ass for almost 3 years. And now you're going to pick a fight with the biggest bad boy on the block?
They're not going to do that. The one way that Putin guarantees that he doesn't continue, period, is to pick a nuclear war with America. That's why every time he's threatened a nuclear response, he threatened it before we gave them HIMARS rocket systems. He threatened it before we gave them the ATACMS, the long-range systems, before main battle tanks, before F-16s, all this stuff, before letting them strike in Ukraine. If you do that, we're going to nuke you. And each time he hasn't. And that's because he hasn't meant it once. There's a reason that nuclear powers don't typically go to war with each other. Even in Afghanistan, near the collapse of the Soviet Union, knowing the whole time that we're supplying the Mujahideen, nothing breaks out there. And it's not going to here either.
Putin's got more red lines than my 8th grade English paper.
And that's saying something, huh,
that
General?
was a lot of red lines. I felt bad for that teacher.
So we have Russia under tremendous strain. And then the question, and I think you used the term earlier, bear trap, which is exactly where we have them. They're stuck in a quagmire. If we destroy their military capability, as we have done, are doing currently in Ukraine, what message does that send to those that are watching? Little Rocket Man, send to China, send to Iran?
I think the message is that the global order must be maintained. We don't live in an isolated world anymore. Everyone's our neighbor. Now that we've got the internet and shipping, and I can fly anywhere in 12 hours and be
basically anywhere in the world.
Anywhere in the world. The world has shrunk, and we cannot allow these bad actors to be doing bad things in the backyard. So if China wants to get frisky and go after Taiwan,
they've watched what is the world's second or third largest and most capable military be effectively destroyed in a smaller neighbor. That's what they're seeing.
By just using Americans' secondhand weapons, our afterthought weapons.
Which raises the question.
Old Bradleys or old tanks.
Right. Old artillery shells, which expire, by the way. Which raises the question, what did that cost us?
You got some numbers over there for me?
I do have some numbers. I was hoping you'd ask. So when we look at the annual defense budget, which pushes, I think, $800 or $850 billion. In the 3 years of the full-scale war in Ukraine, we've offered $175 billion of aid to Ukraine. And that sounds like a lot. And one thing that I think is a misconception for people, and I'll put this to you, they think that money that we're sending to Ukraine is things that could be used to send their kids to daycare or put food on their table. Is that the reality in your mind of the situation?
No. Those weapons are going to be built anyway.
They are.
Like that's just the way the budget's built.
It's earmarked for defense, period.
Right. Either it's going to go to, Troy to build some javelins, or Huntsville to research some rockets, or go to Pennsylvania to build some more artillery shells. Like it's going to go to a blue collar worker somewhere in America and a massive defense manufacturer.
That defense manufacturing takes place in 70 cities around the U.S. 70 cities like Troy, Alabama, that are benefiting from this economically.
It's a lot of pork.
And if we're being honest about that pork, that's what's driven the American economy forward since World War II. really since before that. That's what drug us out of the Depression and has kept this American economic miracle going. Is constant stream of defense spending that's propped up American manufacturing. We talk about auto manufacturers going to Mexico, going overseas. You know what never goes overseas? Defense manufacture.
Yeah, F-16s aren't made in Mexico City.
They're not making those in South Korea,
No.
you know? So everyone says, okay, we've spent all this money on them, and okay, Judge, maybe it's not money off out of my kids' schools or food off the table, but everyone else is not pulling their weight. What do you say to that as far as aid to Ukraine?
It depends on the proportionality of what you send. Like, I'll agree that France, Germany, and Spain and Italy have not been pulling their weight. But Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, the Baltic states, even I think Sweden and Finland now have stepped up and given more than their proportion of GDP to Ukrainian aid. I know Germany has done some good things. I think they can do more, but then again, Germany has always been afraid to ramp up the military stuff since World War II.
Right.
Rightfully so.
I think we kind of gave them that notion.
Yeah. We give you 2 strikes.
Right.
Third one, you're
careful
out.
with that third one. But so to that end, I've got some numbers here, and this is donations to Ukraine, military, financial, humanitarian, as a percentage of GDP. So exactly what you're talking about, the proportional amount that each country gives. The United States comes in at 14th on the list. That's the 14th largest supporter of Ukraine by percentage. Ahead of us goes the Baltic states, like you talked about, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, but also Denmark, Sweden, the Netherlands, Finland, Poland, Slovakia, Germany, the United Kingdom, and the Czech Republic all check in above us as a share of GDP.
Right.
So it's not like we're the only ones doing this. All these countries, all of the Western Bloc agree that our interests are aligned to support Ukraine. And that's not a coincidence. These are the elected, democratically elected leaders of all of these countries agree that it's in our best interest to stand up to Russia.
The one thing I wish America did, or at least I don't know if they've even thought about doing, but remember the Flying Tigers of World War II?
Yeah, the American volunteer force that went to China and fought the Japanese.
Yeah. A bunch of American pilots got mercenary checks to resign for their commission, go to China and fight against the Japanese. I felt like we could do something like that with the F-16 program.
Yeah.
Just, let's give Ukraine, I don't know, 50, 60 jets, and maybe we'll give them, if we could find 100 or so F-16 pilots that are in retirement and they're bored.
That would sign up and go.
Yeah. Or maybe there's some guys that are currently flying F-16s that might want to take a walk across the border.
Well, there were, the Foreign Legion has done significant recruiting in Ukraine, where they've accepted foreigners with military experience to sign up and to fight the Russians, who heard the call of democracy and took up arms.
Right, but they don't have the tools that they had back in their home countries,
True.
Like having a full armored brigade full of ex-tankers, with 15 or 20 tanks, I think would be dramatic. But more, I think the higher technical skill like a weapon systems needs is the volunteerism that I think would go well in Ukraine, like large weapon platforms such as the F-16 or, HIMARS operators or ATACMS, command and control, radar assessment and all that stuff. I think that would be a much better help to the Ukrainians than just a guy in a trench with a gun.
Absolutely.
There's not saying there's nothing wrong with that, but we could also teach small unit tactics, which I think we've been doing since 2014.
And you mentioned 2014, and I think it's important for people to realize that this conflict between Russia and Ukraine didn't just pop off in 2022. It goes back at this point a decade to Russia's invasion of Crimea, taking that from Ukraine, from supporting Russian-backed separatists, quote unquote, in Luhansk and Donetsk.
The little green men.
The little green men that are so clearly Russian, but they allege are grassroots freedom fighters. And so this has been a slow, piecemeal operation by Putin with his eyes set on ultimately recapturing Ukraine. And he's stepped in it. And we have essentially destroyed their conventional military capability, destroyed the economy. And what did it cost us? The answer is 7% of our defense budget. 7%. It's a hell of an investment. That's a hell of an ROI.
To take down a geopolitical rival.
Right. And to send a message to your other geopolitical rivals, and all the while pumping money into your own economy, putting Americans to work. It's win-win-win for us.
We got to do something to help out the average American because they're getting squeezed from every different way.
Every direction. And I think this is one of those things. And the place that I would be critical of the Biden administration here is I think they've done too little, in fact.
I would agree. They should have... they were afraid of escalatory actions, but every time they were afraid of something, they ended up dragging their feet, getting it done eventually, and nothing happened. Right. Like it was main battle tanks. Oh no, that's a red line. Don't do that. Then we gave them Bradleys, which, by the way, I saw a video of a Bradley taking out a T-90.
Absolutely, it can.
I was like, that was very impressive.
It's nasty.
The interview of the Bradley operator that did that said he intentionally shot for the optics of the T-90 because he did it in World of Tanks and it worked. It's like, all right, what? Have at it. So I will say this: the innovativeness of the Ukrainians has been absolutely incredible, and the military intelligence we're gathering from the future of drone warfare, I think it's going to pay for itself.
This is a drone war at this point.
It's a straight up drone war. They're using hobby drones to put a grenade on it, fly it into a tank, and blow it up. Where you can have $75 worth of a drone.
Yeah.
Take out a
$1 million, $5 million piece of equipment.
We got to learn anti-drone defense, whether that be putting Bubba, Herschel, or Earl on the back with a shotgun. I'm saying we need to start hunting birds again.
Right.
Make Alabama a cotton state so we get more quail.
It really has shown the American military leaders what the future of warfare is and shown us what to prepare for. And these are two countries with very capable conventional militaries. And like you said, they're resorting to Amazon drones that they put C4 on. And that's what's getting the job done, blowing up artillery pieces, anti-air defense tanks.
Oh, now they've got mothership drones that drop 4 to 5 smaller drones.
It's unbelievable,
like
the level of innovation that we're seeing.
I think they call it like the Baba Yaga drone, which is basically, I think they used it for farming. Like it was a big heavy industrial type of drone. And that's serving as almost like a mothership because it can stay in the air forever and drop massive amounts of ordnance on whatever. There's still going to be need for tanks, still going to be needed aircraft and all that.
That's not going away.
The HIMARS has shown its effectiveness.
And a limited number of those have been devastating for the Ukrainians.
Well, it's.
And do you want to tell the people what HIMARS are if they don't know?
It's a high mobility rocket system.
Yeah.
Basically, it's like a shoot and scoot. Drive up, pop off a few rockets, run away. But these are highly accurate rockets that have like 7 or 8 different types of ordnances that can drop, including cluster munitions. So you could take out an entire mile of troops with these cluster bombs. And the Russians were terrified of HIMARS because they didn't have a sufficient counter system because all their anti-air was geared toward planes. So you get a low flying rocket coming in there, their S-300 systems just can't. Also, we learned that a lot of these Russian systems that they said they could do stuff really can't. Like their entire air defense just sucked ass. The S-300s and the S-400s have all just been dog shit. They haven't been able to shoot down anything. They had some in this hypersonic rocket, this Kinzinger rocket that was going to come in here and blow up everything. One, it's not hypersonic, and two, it's not accurate at all. So what's the point of having
It's kind of an area weapon, like a weapon of terrorist or like a V2.
Yeah, you go back to it's going to hit that general area. Well, that has no use in the modern warfare. You need to hit a specific target in order to degrade the enemy, the enemy's capabilities. Like instead of I'm taking out that kind of area of that city.
And those Russian capabilities have been degraded to the extent that they're turning to Iran for artillery shells and drones. They're turning to North Korea for the same thing. Hell, they even have North Korean soldiers in Ukraine now.
The Chinese golf carts.
So let's. I think the last thing to cover here, and we've hit every aspect, I think, of what's currently going on there. Why, in your estimation, two questions really. One, why now, as far as Biden authorizing strikes into Russia proper? And two, what does that do for the Ukrainians?
He's doing it now because he's worried Trump will put the thumb on the scale against Zelensky and the Ukrainians as far as what they can do. By authorizing these strikes, you are devastating an entire line of Russian logistics that they can't repair. They don't have the tools or the manpower to fix those logistics hubs, and you can basically push Russia miles and miles back by taking out all their fuel dumps, train, cars, railroads, roads, bridges, and Russia's going to have a very difficult time supplying the front line with anything, including water.
Right. They've set up their entire logistics apparatus on this idea that the Ukrainians aren't allowed to strike on the other side of this arbitrarily imposed line. And when you erase that, it completely changes the dynamic.
Well, it happened already with HIMARS. HIMARS came in and pushed them back all the way to the borders.
And then ATACMS happened.
Now they got to go back 100 or so miles to get out of ATACMS range. And you just can't have guys running stuff over 100 miles. You need to have logistics hubs in order to distribute ammo, food, water, whatever else you need. And if those are gone, the guys on the front line are going to be hurting bad.
And nobody knows what the Trump administration is going to do. There's what he says is one thing, what he does is often another. And I think that's one thing that his supporters often say is, well, he says that. He doesn't actually mean it. And then they sort of get to project whatever they want onto him. So we don't know what he's going to do with Ukraine.
Schrodinger's president?
It is. So we don't know what he's going to do with Ukraine or what he's going to do in regard to Ukraine. But if we let them off the hook there, we've got our greatest enemy since the end of the Second World War by the balls in a vice grip in Ukraine. And if we let them off the hook, it's going to be one of the greatest geopolitical disasters probably since Vietnam for the Americans.
I don't think we can let them off the hook because they're already too far on the hook. I think even if Trump pulls out and tells Zelensky he can't use anything, there will be enough European support to get them over the hump, which is the next 6 months. I don't see Russia lasting after that. With the inflation the way it is and their interest rates out of control, their entire economy is collapsing as we speak right now. So they can't hang on another year or two. If Biden would have put the screws to him a little bit more,
it might be over now.
It would have been over now. But like a lot of things I have with the Biden administration, they just sat on their asses and didn't do anything. But
yeah. So with that, Slava Ukraini, huh?
Slava Ukraini. All right. Well, that's it for us. We wish you a happy Thanksgiving, and